There was a time when Mortal Kombat was the biggest video game-inspired movie franchise in the world, but somewhere along the way, things took a turn. So, how did it rise so suddenly only to fall into a bloody pit of spikes? The first three Mortal Kombat games were released in 1992, 1993, and 1995. Springboarding off the popularity of Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat absolutely dominated the mid to late 90s. Out of the many different fighting games released in this era, Mortal Kombat stood out for its unique visual style, which was achieved through digitized footage of real actors. Mortal Kombat 1 was certainly not the first game to do this, but it was the first to use this style to deliver truly visceral interactive violence. Today, these classic graphics and gameplay are more of a novelty for retro CRT arcade gaming nerds, a great example of how video game designers worked around the limitations of the medium before the turn of the century. At the time, however, Mortal Kombat was considered to be remarkably realistic and mind-blowingly violent. And the results speak for themselves. In 1993, the game's distributor, Acclaim Entertainment, received an unprecedented 70,000 calls from customers wanting to secure copies of Mortal Kombat. They forced Acclaim to set up its own nationwide system for reserving advanced copies of the game. And while they expected to sell around 2 million copies of Mortal Kombat for home systems like the SNES and Sega Genesis, Acclaim actually ended up selling 3 million by November of 1993. That same year, Mortal Kombat also earned the title of Most Controversial Game, awarded by the popular magazine Electronic Gaming Monthly. So, how much controversy did the bloodiest game of the decade actually stir up? Now here's where things take a turn. Mortal Kombat's carnage and fatalities impressed its core demographic of young gamers, but at the same time, the game also generated concern among parents and public officials. Alongside games like Night Trap and Doom, Mortal Kombat was one of the games that led to congressional hearings on the impact of violent games on youth. So, from December of 1993 to March of 1994, Senate committees met with representatives of the video game industry to discuss the sensitive matter. Led by Senators Joseph Lieberman and Herb Pohl, the federal government gave the gaming industry 1 year to develop a working rating system for video games, or else the government itself would step in to impose strict regulations. Eventually, this led to the creation of the ESRB, or Entertainment Software Ratings Board. Not surprisingly, this only gave the Mortal Kombat franchise even more notoriety, making it much more popular with its core demographic. And in fact, just a year after this public hearing commenced, the first Mortal Kombat movie forever changed the face of video game to film adaptations. From being a controversial series of violent fighting games, how exactly did Mortal Kombat transform into a genre-defining film franchise? When it hit theaters in 1995, the very first Mortal Kombat film was already being developed as early as 1993, and it's all thanks to the film producer Lawrence Larry Kasanoff. While visiting his friends at Midway Games, Mortal Kombat's publisher, Kasanoff played the game for just 30 minutes, and as he was immediately enamored by its potential to become a full-blown film franchise. During an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Kasanoff revealed his initial pitch to the then chief of Midway Games, Neil D. Nicastro. As Kasanoff told Nicastro, "This is Star Wars meets Enter the Dragon. This is not just an arcade game, this is a whole phenomenon. If you give me the rights to this, I promise you I will produce this, not just in movies, but in every medium in the world." However, the folks at Midway were a lot less enthusiastic about Kasanoff's vision, and for a good reason. 1993 was also the year that the first Super Mario Bros. Movie bombed at the box office. So, while video game to movie adaptations are considered risky today, they were considered to be utterly hopeless in the mid-90s. This is why it took 3 months for Kasanoff to convince Midway to option him the rights to Mortal Kombat, and only for a highly limited amount of time. From there, everything slowly came together to bring Kasanoff's vision to life. Despite objections from executives at New Line, those same execs gave the script the green light to proceed for production. At the time, then unknown filmmaker Paul W.S. Anderson spent hours playing arcade games daily, including Mortal Kombat. So, while established directors scoffed at the campy script, Anderson jumped at the chance to direct the first MK movie. Eventually, a formidable cast was assembled, which notably includes Robin Shou as Liu Kang, Christopher Lambert as Raiden, Fairy Hiroyuki Tagawa as Shang Tsung, Lindy Ashby as Johnny Cage, and Bridget Wilson as Sonya Blade. These weren't just big names back in the 90s, the cast and crew actually had chemistry on set. In fact, Anderson encouraged the cast to ad-lib jokes and wisecracks, leading to Johnny Cage and Raiden's now iconic one-liners.
Those were $500 sunglasses, asshole.
Mortal Kombat creators Ed Boon and John Tobias had reservations about this approach, and so did scriptwriter Kevin Droney, but they also collaborated with the actors to develop what would become the final screenplay. As Lyndon Ashby explained, "We didn't write Hamlet or anything, but we had a lot of fun with it." And ultimately, it was this attitude that paved the way for the rise of the Mortal Kombat film franchise. Conceived by big fans of the game and greenlit by execs that didn't believe it would succeed, the movie was less of a business decision and more of a passion project. In the end, Mortal Kombat's combination of tongue-in-cheek humor, practical effects, cheesy dialogue, and awesome fight scenes broke the mold of video game to movie adaptations. To this day, this movie arguably features what is still the best cinematic version of Scorpion's signature. Get over here! Produced for just $20 million, Mortal Kombat went on to gross $122.2 million in the box office, or a little over 6 times its budget. In fact, Mortal Kombat actually held the record for being the highest grossing video game-inspired film for the next 3 years, until Pokemon, the first movie, grossed $172 million in theaters in 1998. 3 decades since it first came out in 1995, Mortal Kombat still gets a lot of love today, from its cult following and those who consider it to be the best so bad it's good movies from the 90s. And whether you agree or not, Mortal Kombat has cemented its place in history as the very first cinematic video game adaptation to garner commercial and critical success. Way back in 1995, Mortal Kombat was on top of the world, but what happened next would nearly kill the franchise. Unfortunately, the sequel didn't fare as well as the first movie. While New Line Cinema nearly doubled the production budget at $30 million, the second movie, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, grossed just about $51 million in theaters in 1997. Loosely based on the video game Mortal Kombat 3, Annihilation actually had better sets, costumes, and fights, and not unlike the first movie, Mortal Kombat Annihilation featured scenes that expertly treaded the line between awesome and campy. However, the sequel simply failed to recapture the magic of the original film. It didn't certainly help that most of the characters were recast for various reasons, and that fan favorite Johnny Cage was killed off in the first 10 minutes. The sequel failed so hard that the planned follow-up was cancelled and then banished to development hell for the next 2 decades. Of course, there were other factors at play, such as Midway going bankrupt and then being acquired by Warner Brothers in 2011. However, the commercial and critical flop of Annihilation would come to define the state of the Mortal Kombat movie franchise for years to come. To be fair, Mortal Kombat never really failed as a video game franchise, even after Annihilation flopped. Since 1992, there have been a total of 25 official Mortal Kombat games, 18 of them releasing after the failure of Annihilation in 1997. With the latest games like Mortal Kombat 1 coming out to stellar reviews, and this certainly helped in maintaining the clamor for the next NK movie. That being said, it wasn't until the 2020s that the movie franchise was picked up again, this time though through animated films. About a decade after Midway became NetherRealm Studios, the critically acclaimed animated film Mortal Kombat Legends: Scorpion's Revenge revitalized interest in the film franchise in 2020. Scorpion's Revenge was even followed by 3 animated sequels, and though some garnered mixed reviews, there's even a 4th one that's in the works. Meanwhile, after Annihilation, the next official live-action MK film would only come out 24 years later in 2021. Simply titled Mortal Kombat, the 2021 film was a reboot that combined elements from the original game and its follow-ups, and overall, the reboot isn't bad at all. It violently drags the Mortal Kombat film franchise into the next century, while simultaneously paying tribute to its roots. Although Louis Tran's Cole Young proved to be divisive, the star and franchise newcomer is proof positive that MK's core stories can still evolve. And while Johnny Cage wasn't in the reboot, Josh Lawson's Kano expertly brought back the irreverent humor that made the very first MK movie so iconic. Indeed, the reboot crew expertly utilized its $55 million budget to deliver cutting-edge CGI, extremely well choreographed fights, and inarguably the best script out of any live-action MK film. However, even the reboot's astounding depiction of fatalities weren't enough for the franchise to regain box office glory. In the end, the 2021 reboot grossed about $84 million in the box office and garnered mixed reviews. Although the reboot remains well loved by the core MK fanbase, it ultimately failed to make the film franchise mainstream again. Ironically, by focusing on the very themes that the first movie made popular, the 2021 reboot came off as just another modern action fantasy film. Yet, despite all of this, a sequel is actually slated for release this year, set to hit theaters in October 24th of 2025. Mortal Kombat 2 will pick up where the 2021 reboot left off, and based on what's been revealed about the sequel, it may just have what it takes to recapture lightning in a bottle. It remains to be seen whether the 2025 sequel can actually revitalize Mortal Kombat as a viable and continuing movie franchise. However, there are some good signs. For starters, Warner Bros. Greenlit the sequel in 2022, despite the commercial and critical failure of the reboot, and this points to Mortal Kombat 2 being another legit passion project. In fact, Mortal Kombat 2 is actually one of the movies that survived the forced production break of the SAG-AFTRA writer strike in 2023. Yet perhaps the clearest positive sign is the inclusion of The Boys and Dread star Karl Urban in the fan-favorite role of Johnny Cage. In hindsight, Urban is practically built for the role. A well-rounded actor known for his dramatic chops, comedic timing, and physicality, Urban may be exactly what Mortal Kombat needs to re-establish itself in live-action cinema. Moreover, this time around, the screenplay was written by Jeremy Slater, who also is known as the producer who developed The Umbrella Academy. Slater is also the creator of the short-lived but critically acclaimed The Exorcist series on Fox. Yet, as promising as the sequel seems to be, the cast and crew face possibly the biggest challenge of their respective careers. 30 years after the first movie came out, Mortal Kombat 2 will determine the very future of the franchise that made cinematic video game adaptations cool.